Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of our Green New York Lunchtime Learning webinar series. I want to thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Brendan Woodruff. I'm the co-chair of the Green New York Operations and Engagement Subcommittee. And for this webinar today, you're stuck with me for the entire time. So I'll be your captain as we cruise through the world of climate-friendly eating today. A few housekeeping things as we get started. The webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to view it afterwards on the Green New York website, or if you have coworkers that might be interested, feel free to send them it as well. And the URL for that is just ogs.ny.gov/greenny. If you do have questions as we go along, please type them into the chat box. I'll be getting to them at the end of the webinar today, so you can just type them in as you think of them, and we'll get to them at the end. Just so you know as well, everybody is on mute to try and cut down on background noise. So with the holidays here, just one more housekeeping tip. I wanted to give you a couple ideas for things you can do to cut down on a lot of the waste that's generated. One is to create your own reusable gift bags. It's something that we've been promoting quite a bit around here. Take some fabric, even if you have scraps, you can sew or super glue it together or hot glue gun it. Create a little ribbon, so it's a little drawstring, and you can reuse that year after year after year. You still get some of the, it's not quite tearing into like you would get with a regular wrapping paper, but you still do get to open presents, so it's something. Also think about gifts that you can give to people if you're still shopping for gifts that enhance their ability to live sustainably. A couple ideas on that front are things like reusable cutlery, reusable straws, mesh produce bags are something that a lot of people don't have. Safety razors are another one to cut down on plastic waste from razors. And then there's these really cool collapsible takeout containers that you take with you for leftovers after a meal at a restaurant. You just kind of pop them out of your bag. They expand. They're really cool, something to think about. And with that, we're going to get into today's topic, which is climate-friendly eating. And this is one of the topics that I'm really excited about having this webinar series for. It's something that we've seen a lot in the news lately. A lot of companies out there are creating new products. They're talking about the carbon footprint of the food that we eat. And really what we wanted to do today was to break that down beyond the hype. So you might have heard of your local fast food chain or another restaurant offering the latest and greatest in plant-based products or other things. And there's a lot of information out there, but what we really wanted to focus on today is giving you the information behind the scenes on that and looking at the food system in a holistic way. So switching from some sort of a meat-based burger to a plant-based one like what you're seeing in the news all the time is something that will lower your carbon footprint, but it's not the end-all be-all. So we want to do today, kind of go through everything, and also let you know that there is no one right answer. Everybody is different when it comes to their diet, when it comes to their culture. Food is very cultural, and there's a lot that's baked into that. And what we wanted to do was give you the facts and let you make the decisions to lower your carbon footprint how you feel right and that fits in with your lifestyle. So that's really our goal today. Full disclosure, I have been a vegetarian for the past 16 years. So I do know quite a bit about this subject, but as I said, this is not going to be a preachy affair. It's going to be a let's look at the facts and figure out what works for you. So the topics we're going to cover today are purchasing food, the type of food that you're purchasing, reducing the impact of wasted food, and then some tips that we have for when you're eating out. So the first is purchasing food. The first thing we want you to think about when you're thinking about climate-friendly eating and how to lower the carbon footprint of the food you consume is to eat local. A lot of emissions come from the transportation of food. A lot of the fresh food that we see in the supermarket this time of year, and as we're getting into the winter time, has a very large carbon footprint because it's being shipped from warmer areas. Other things involving purchasing food, consider where you're purchasing the food from. We're going to get into kind of the sustainability of markets a little bit, avoiding excess packaging, and considering the climate impact of the food you are serving. So first is eating local. And I wanted to kind of bring this all the way back out to the beginning, is the most local you can ever get is from your own backyard or your local woods, if you will. So growing a garden is always a fantastic idea. Any local food that you can grow is good and lowers your carbon footprint, period. When you're planting your garden or thinking about it, another thing to think about is what will last. It's always good to have fresh greens in the summer, or to have fresh peas or beans or tomatoes. They're fantastic. But think about things like onions and potatoes, too, that will last a little bit longer, or the ingredients for things like chili sauce, tomato sauce, hot sauce, things like that. And if you have more than you can grow, feel free to give it away. That's also another great thing. Every time you give somebody, say, some beans or some peppers or some cucumbers, that's something they're not buying from the grocery store that potentially has been flown thousands of miles to get there. The other thing I wanted to touch on quickly is hunting, and it's not something that we think about when we're talking about climate-friendly eating, but it is a form of local meat when you are hunting deer and other things. And another interesting point about hunting is there's a climate resiliency impact to this as well. So in a lot of areas in New York State, we have deer overpopulation, and when that happens, the deer eat. It's called deer browsing. If you're driving through fields in a lot of parts of the state, you can actually look across the field and see where the forest is. You'll see that there's very little vegetation below maybe 6 or 7 feet, and that's the deer browse line. And the deer also eat a lot around streams. So if there's an overpopulation of deer that eat around the streams, that means there's going to be more erosion when we have these large precipitation events that are becoming more frequent with climate change. You're going to erode the stream further. You're going to have more impactful flooding. So hunting not only is a way to lower the carbon footprint of the meat you're eating, but also it's a climate resiliency action as well. So I mentioned before buying local. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality did a study on the greenhouse gas emissions of the state and found that roughly 7% of food emissions from the state came from pre-purchase transportation. So we're going to get into the numbers a little bit later, but that's fairly large. Here in New York State, we do have a very vibrant agricultural sector that grows a lot of different things, which is fantastic for when we're looking for eating local. Two ways that you can make sure that you're purchasing local are looking for the New York Grown and Certified program. They work with farms to make sure that the food is raised in a way where it follows environmental standards, and also that it comes from New York State farms. There's also the Taste New York program that you can look at as well, and both of those are going to make sure that the food is coming from New York State. Another tip for eating local is look for foods that are in season in New York. So as you're going throughout the year, I know quite a few people have CSAs, community-supported agriculture shares from a local farm. That's a great way to do it. But even when you're at your local supermarket or co-op, think about this. A lot of times they will get things that are local in season, so in June and July they might be getting strawberries or beans. If you're buying strawberries or beans now, you're probably getting them from somewhere else that has been flown in quite a bit. This time of year you might still get apples, you might still be able to get some potatoes, onions, things like that, so look for that. And then also look carefully at the claims made on shelves. We talk a lot about greenwashing out there. You know, when something says it's local, take a look at where it's from. We don't have a strict definition of that. You know, we're talking about New York State products here, but think about what local means to you and look at what the claim being made is. So consider your seller. Another thing to think about is where you're purchasing your food from. Are you driving 15 miles through traffic into the suburbs to go to the grocery store 2 or 3 times a week? That's going to increase the carbon footprint of your food. Are there any establishments within walking or biking distance, or that are on the way home so you don't have to make a separate trip? Or can you combine trips? You know, as I said, we're trying to think of this holistically, and getting the food from the market to your house, that kind of last mile situation is something to think about as well. Think about if the establishment you're purchasing the food from has any sustainable features. Do they have porous pavement in the parking lot? Do they have solar panels? Do they buy local? Do they have programs to lower excess packaging? Do they have EV chargers? Are they on bus lines? Do they have bike parking, things like that? It all adds up. And when you let a market know that that is important to you and that's one of the reasons you shopped there, that's going to make them think that they should continue doing what they're doing because it's good for business. Another great way is to go to a local farmer's market. I've got a link here to where you can find your local farmer's market. For those of you in the Albany area here, on Thursdays in downtown, there's one at the SUNY Plaza during good weather, and up at the Empire State Plaza, they have them regularly. And I believe the Harriman campus also has farmer's markets in season as well. So talking about the impact that buying local has, tried to see how many puns we could throw in here at once and have some fun with it, but let's be frank here, it makes a big difference. We at the Pollution Prevention Unit at DEC worked with a Western New York hospitality company, and they made a switch from serving hot dogs that were manufactured in South Dakota to ones made in Buffalo, and that is saving 4 tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year simply by making that switch. So for the business community, there's a lot of ways that this can add up once you start looking into the supply chain and where you can lower your carbon footprint, but it also works, as I mentioned, on the individual level as well. Another thing I really want to mention here as well is avoiding excess packaging. And when we think of the climate crisis, and we also hear about the plastic pollution crisis with single-use plastics ending up in the oceans, ending up everywhere, I kind of want to make a link between the two here. Most single-use plastics are made from petrochemicals, so there's a huge impact to that. You're extracting the fossil fuels from the ground. You're then creating the single-use plastic item, so there's all the emissions involved in that, and then the processing of getting natural gas or oil into a form where it can be plastic. We're then using it for 5 to 10 minutes, and then if we're lucky, it's getting recycled. And if we're not, it's ending up in the ocean or a landfill where it stays there a long time. So packaging is a really large part of this, and it does have a very large climate impact. So some ways to do this are to buy in bulk when possible. Look for concentrated forms of ingredients if you can. One of those would be something like sports drinks. A lot of times you can buy, big 12 packs or 18 packs of plastic bottles of sports drinks, or you might be able to get the concentrated versions at the end of an aisle. If you can do that, you're going to go a lot further towards lowering the amount of plastic that's generated. Also look for establishments that allow you to refill your own containers. A lot of times food co-ops have this, but it is starting to grow. I was at a pet store the other day, and they had refillable kitty litter containers, which is a great way because those are large containers. So there are more and more options for that as consumers are demanding it and asking for it, so be on the lookout for that. Another great way is to bring your own bag. New York State's plastic bag ban goes into effect on March 1st, 2020, so that's something to take into account as well. And this goes beyond just the plastic bags at the end of the supermarket checkout. It can also include mesh bags for produce. Right here is one that I've got that's really handy. I just throw that in my reusable bag, and that way I don't need any plastic at all. We're not getting the little things that we put our potatoes and onions and other things in. And if you're purchasing online, see if there's an option for less packaging. Some online retailers are doing that now. You can check a box. Another good thing, if you're purchasing food online, is to make sure that you opt for the slower shipping method. 2-day shipping comes with a massive environmental price, and if you've ever ordered 5 or 10 items from one retailer, you might see that they come in 3 or 4 different containers. If there is an option for a slower way to ship it to you, it might take 3 to 5 days instead of 2 days. That's going to have a much lower impact both from a greenhouse gas standpoint and also from a packaging standpoint, where they'll be able to put everything into one container because they're not rushing to pick it and get it out the door as soon as possible. So this is probably why you're all here today, is getting into the actual climate impact of the food we eat. So most of the charts coming up here are coming from a World Resource Institute report that came out in July of this year. It's called Creating a Sustainable Food Future. I also have sources for everything that we're talking about here, for all the facts and figures on the last slide, so you can go and check those as well if you would like to. So 37% of Earth's land mass, excluding Antarctica, is used for food production. 37% of all land is used for food production. Out of that, 12% is used to cultivate crops, and 25% is used for pastures and meadows for the raising of livestock. So agricultural emissions are incredibly important as we're looking towards the future and meeting our climate change goals. Roughly 24% of all humanity's greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. Out of those, 10% come from land use change, and forestry. And what this means is when you see the pictures of the Amazon rainforest being burned down for cattle farms, it's precisely that. It's when you're changing land from either grassland or a forest that's a carbon sink, so it's sucking carbon out of the air, and you're now putting it into agricultural use where it's generating emissions instead. That's what that 10% is. So 10% of humanity's emissions are actually coming from the land use change that we have made to switch from things like forests and grasslands to agricultural land. 14% come from actual agricultural production. The largest of those is ruminant intricate fermentation, which is probably something you have heard a lot about, and that actually is cow burps. It is a common misconception that it is coming out of the other end of the cow, but it is actually coming out of the front end. That is what that is. And you can see around this here, ruminant wastes on pastures, so that's when there's waste on the pasture, and usually methane comes out of that. Manure management is a big issue as well. We are seeing some local farms that have actually put in digesters that then they can use the methane to create power for their farms. That's one way to actually manage those emissions pretty effectively, but it's still not large scale. Energy that's used in the agricultural products, this is the tractors, this is getting the products to market and things like that. We also have the rice methane. Rice does have a large methane footprint, and then soil fertilization is another large part of that as well. So this is also a growing problem. The world population is getting much larger, as we know. Humanity is doing a much better job when it comes to medicine and when it comes to increasing the standard of living for folks, and that is fantastic. I think this century we're going to see a huge leap forward in the standard of living for people all throughout the world, but that's also putting a strain on our resources. So this World Resources Institute study used a 2010 baseline. You can see here on the left about 12 gigatons of CO2 emissions a year are coming from our food system. The next three bars here, as we're going to the right, are projections based on population gain and also by where we're at in terms of productivity gains in agriculture. You know, we've heard a lot about how technology is changing agriculture, whether it's indoor farms or being able to grow crops more effectively. Under all of these scenarios, our emissions are going up, period. Whether we have aggressive productivity gains, midline productivity gains, or no productivity gains. And to meet our emissions targets for the Paris Climate Accords, we need to go down to under 5 gigatons a year. And as of right now, as you can see, even with our best case scenarios, with the current diet, with the trajectory we're on, that is just not possible. So when you might have heard about the recent UN climate report on the emissions gap, this is a large part of it right here. And this right here is the slide that probably a lot of you came here for. And this is the greenhouse gas impacts of different types of food. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to get into a little bit about looking at what you're putting on your plate in addition to all the other holistic things we're looking at. So this chart here shows greenhouse gas emissions from agricultural production per million calories consumed. So this is the emissions needed to create 1 million calories to be consumed by people. And as you can see here, is probably not a surprise, is beef is way out on top of this one. It's at about 19 tons of CO2 per million calories, and then it goes down the line here. And with this slide, I want to, as I said before, I'm not advocating for anybody to make any specific changes. This is knowledge. So I'm presenting this so that you can see this and you can make your own decisions when you're planning your meals, and you can know what the impact of that is. So if you're looking at something and you're like, should we have a hamburger, a chicken sandwich tonight, or a veggie burger, or whatever it is, you will now know what the climate impact of that is. So I think this is a really powerful chart. No matter what direction you decide to go in terms of lowering your carbon footprint, this is one area where there is a lot to be gained. And the next section I wanted to talk about here was food waste emissions. Food waste would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world if it were its own country. The world's food waste emits much more greenhouse gas emissions than India, a nation with over 1 billion people that is rapidly developing. So this is something we need to get our hands around as we go forward. And luckily, there are a lot of easy ways to do this. And our own Gary Fineland did a fantastic webinar last month focused solely on reducing wasted food. So I suggest if you want to learn more about that, that you go back and watch that. It is on the Green New York website. But a couple quick tips here. Plan your meals in advance is the best thing you can do. Do not go to the grocery store hungry. I do that all the time, and I leave with way more food than I need. And then I'm trying to figure out how to preserve it. Make leftovers sexy is one of my favorite tips for people when it comes to sustainability. Whatever you have, put it in a taco. People love tacos. Quiches work as well. Create a use first section of your fridge where you put things that might be going bad so that it will remind you to use them first. Only consume and purchase the calories you need, and this is a large part of that World Resources Institute's report, and this is a tough one. We know that over the last 20 to 30 years in the developed world and even in the developing world now, we've seen a lot of issues, mainly around public health when it comes to obesity and overconsumption of calories. But there's also an environmental toll on that as well when it comes to what we've been talking about here. So all of the calories that are put into our bodies, into our systems that we might not have needed are creating all of those greenhouse gas emissions, all of those other negative externalities when it comes to deforestation and everything else. So it's just something to be conscious of and think about as we go forward. We want to reduce wasted food, but if we can also reduce the amount of food as well, that is also going to make a difference. And also make sure that you compost anything that you do have left. If you have scraps or you have things that you just couldn't get rid of the waste of, which there is always something. We have a webinar from last year, also by Gary Fineland, that you can find on the Green New York website that outlines home composting. And if your community has commercial composting, that is something to think about as well. So I just wanted to complete this webinar with some tips for eating out. The first one is to stay local and avoid driving to a destination if possible. So if you live in a neighborhood where you can take the bus or you can walk or you can carpool to your local neighborhood restaurant, that's a great way to lower the carbon footprint of the overall meal that you're going to be enjoying. See if there's a Green Restaurant Association member nearby. This is a fantastic program. And what I really like about it is not only do the restaurants say this is what I'm doing to be more sustainable, but it has continuous improvement requirements. So every year the restaurants are having to find some sort of new initiative to implement, which I really think is fantastic. So they're staying on top of things. Ask the restaurant if they have any kind of sustainability initiatives and let them know they're important to you. As with what we were mentioning on with the grocery stores, this is something as well where the managers, really like to hear what they're doing well. I know that if I see a place that has taken the last straw pledge or something like that, I always make sure to mention to them, this is fantastic. It's one of the reasons I'm here. Skip the straw if you can. A lot of places will put it on the table, or if you order a drink that you think might come with a straw, you can let them know up front that you don't want one. That's just a little simple tip. Bring your own leftover containers. So this is one of those little collapsible ones that I mentioned before. I love these. I have gotten some weird looks when I pull them out, but then people go, oh, that's so smart. That's a really great thing to have. You can find these online, and they work really well. And if you are getting takeout, see if the restaurant offers a low waste option. I know a couple of the online delivery platforms offer low waste options where you can say, I don't need forks or knives or silverware or extra napkins or sauce packets or anything. I know we've all gotten, delivery and seen at the bottom of the bag is 1 million pieces of single-use plastic that we didn't need. So if there is an option for that, you can check that box. If there's not, you can ask for it. I've asked for that as well, and I have yet to have a place that's not said that was a good thing. So a couple tips for eating out. And lastly on this slide, I just wanted to give you a summary of tips. Again, as we're going down through everything, eat local, look for New York State grown and certified and Taste New York products if you can. Consider the sustainability of the market you're shopping at. Bring your own bags, buy in bulk. Look for lower waste shipping options, plan your meals. Consider the climate impacts of the food that you are serving. Make leftovers sexy. Create that use first section of your fridge. And on the list here, this is a good thing to screenshot as well if you'd like a summary of the tips. So I did mention in my marketing for this that poutine would be involved, and here we are. We've come to the poutine section of today's webinar. Here on the left is my version of poutine that I make for myself, and poutine is a good illustration of what we're talking about when we're looking at sourcing our food. So if you look at the traditional version of poutine, you're looking at French fries, you're looking at gravy, and you're looking at cheese curds, which, all fantastic things. And you can make those by just buying the, French fries that come from the freezer section of the grocery store, maybe grown in Idaho, maybe grown even further afield. The gravy, which, as we mentioned before, has the carbon footprint of whatever the base of it is. So if it's beef gravy or if it's chicken gravy or something, that's going to have a higher carbon footprint than, say, a mushroom gravy or an onion gravy or something, some sort of vegetable stock. When we look at the cheese, if you're buying just some sort of national brand cheese that comes from somewhere, that's going to be traveling wherever it's coming from and however it was packaged. If you're buying local cheese, then you're lowering the carbon footprint and you're bringing that within, hopefully New York State. And so my version here is I'll buy potatoes from a local farmer's market or as local as I can get them. I peel them first, and then I take the skins and I crisp them in the oven while I'm making the rest of the dish. So on the top there you're seeing those crisp potato skins, so instead of those going into the composting bin, those are now part of the dish. Good poutine, in my humble opinion, the potatoes are kind of soggy, they suck up all the flavor of the melted cheese and the gravy, and this puts a little bit more crunch in there. When you get the crunchy French fries, sometimes they don't absorb the flavors as much, so this kind of puts the crunch back in. So I just use poutine to illustrate kind of how we can lower the carbon footprint of what we're doing, and how it is kind of emblematic of everything we have talked about here. And again, even when we're looking at waste, if you purchase the potatoes from a local farmer's market or a supermarket and you brought your own mesh bag, there's going to be no plastic waste, versus if you've got that bag in the freezer aisle, that's going to have plastic film that probably can't be recycled. So with that, I want to thank everybody for being on the webinar today, and we're going to get to questions now. So as the great Fraser Crane said, I'm listening. So type them into the chat box, and we will start to get to them. So let's see. Okay. I will, yeah. One of the first comments here is, this Gary Fineland sounds like a real winner. I do agree. Could not agree more. Good comment. All right, so one comment here is, we have started asking delivery food to not include utensils or condiments, and so far there's been about a 50% success rate. And yes, that has been about my experience as well. One of the things is culture change is hard. Especially in the service industry, a lot of people are used to, over-giving when it comes to napkins or other things, especially, kind of a fast food place or a takeout place, because they feel that if they don't give enough, then they're not giving the correct hospitality. So a lot of that is just the more of us that are there saying this, the more that the restaurants and other institutions will start to move in that direction, and, the more the culture shifts. So, let's see here, I'm having some technical difficulties bringing these up. Okay. So one of the comments here, I could not find a Syracuse location for a green dining restaurant member. The program does have a decent amount of members, but it doesn't have coverage everywhere. So that also is something where if you wanted to ask your favorite restaurant if they're doing anything on this and suggest that they reach out to the Green Restaurant Association, I think that's a great idea. That's something that you could do. That would hopefully, help them market the fact that, they're doing great things on the environment and also get them resources to go even further. Are there resources comparing the carbon footprint of wild-caught fish to the other foods? I am not sure. That's something I would suggest doing a little bit more research in. I'm not sure of anything off the top of my head on that. I could see there being a lot of variables with that, especially involving, where it is, what type of ship is being used, how it's processed, and things like that. So that might be a tough metric to get, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere. Does organic certified food have less of a carbon footprint? Also, how reliable and trustworthy are the certifiers who certify overseas foods as organic, such as apples, etc.? So organic only deals with the fact that they're not using pesticides and other chemicals in the process. It does not get into the carbon footprint of food. So if we're looking for an apples to oranges comparison of, an organic potato that you might get at the grocery store that could have been flown in from Idaho versus a non-organic potato that was grown, that you picked up at a farmer's market. The one that you picked up at the farmer's market is probably going to have a lower carbon footprint, but it might have been grown using pesticides. So two different things there, but definitely, something to take into consideration. And there's always, when it comes to environmental attributes, multiple things. Can you elaborate on ruminant enteric fermentation? A little bit. This is not my area of expertise, but more or less it's animals like cows, the way that they process a lot of the roughage that they eat, since a lot of it is grass and hay and cellulose-based, it takes a lot to break that down. And as they are breaking that down, it creates a lot of methane, which then comes out the front end of the cow in the form of burps. And that's where that is coming from. So it's actually when the animal is eating the food and how it is processing it, and since the diet is, in a sense, more poor nutrient-wise, and also, with a ton of cellulose in it, it's creating a lot of methane in the process. So we bring our own bags to Subway. We eat there on game nights, and they've avoided about 300 bags. That's fantastic. I know there's a lot of places like that where if you say you don't need a bag, they won't give you one. But yes, I've brought my own bag to that establishment as well, and they will just put them in your own bag. I'm just bringing up the other questions here. And if you do have more questions, make sure to type them into the chat box here. One is, what does GHG stand for? That is greenhouse gas emissions. And that's all-encompassing, so a lot of times you hear carbon emissions, or that is simply carbon dioxide. If it is GHG, it's all-encompassing of things like methane, which with cattle is an issue, and with decomposition of various things. And another person is commenting that they've frustrated with a lot of the supermarkets where you will see a lot of packaging for produce that is in plastic containers or plastic wrap, and a lot of times it is cheaper than the quote-unquote fresh stuff that is left out that you could use your mesh bags for. That is something that I've seen as well. One thing that does factor into that is a lot of the organic requirements say that it needs to be, many times has to be packaged on its own if it's intermixed with non-organic food, to make sure that there's no cross-contamination of the pesticides or other things that might be on the produce. So sometimes with the organic, you are getting a little more waste that way. But that is something to bring up to management at these institutions, is to say, there's a lot of packaging on this, and, I'd rather bring my own mesh bag. But I think a lot of times when you go over to the section where you're picking your own, it's considered some sort of a premium. And, the packaged stuff is sometimes cheaper. So that's something to definitely bring up and see. That's going to come with the culture change when we do that. So, can we get a copy of the presentation slides? Yes, this will be posted online. If you would like a version of just the slides, feel free to email me. My contact information is right on the screen here. I will get back to you with a copy of the slides. Is New York State making laws to get rid of plastic, and what about styrofoam? So on the plastic front, as I mentioned, the plastic bag ban is going into effect March 1st, 2020. I know a lot of local municipalities around the state have things on polystyrene foam. I know Albany County, for larger chain restaurants and things, has phased that out. That's why if you go to certain chain coffee shops, you'll get a different cup, whether you're in Albany County versus a couple of the other ones in the area. And it's something that's coming up more and more. So I would be on the lookout for that. And if that's something that's important to you, I would make that known to decision makers. So let's see here. I know someone who gets a basket and boxes of food every week or so from a farmer during the summer months. Is there a site that has contacts for initiatives like this? Those are called community-supported agriculture, or CSAs, where you buy a share of what the farm is putting out the next year. Usually around January, February, you'll see the farms start to announce their offerings for the next year. So I would keep a lookout for that. You can do some searching online. You'll be able to find local ones around you. And a lot of them have pickup points right near where state offices are. I know here in Albany there's quite a few that deliver to various offices around the area. And it's a great way to both give the farmer business, knowing a lot of times, depending on how many CSA shares they have and what people are looking for, they'll plant their crops around that. So that gives them the upfront money to get the fields ready to plant more diverse crops than just regular monoculture, and be able to get that into people's hands. Let's see here. I've got a comment saying that although the U.S. has pulled out of the Paris Agreement, we can do better as individuals. I wholeheartedly agree. Another thing on that front is that New York State is part of the U.S. Climate Alliance and the We Are Still In group, where we are forging ahead to meet our goals, not only under the Paris Agreement, but to go even more aggressive. So we are still in, we're still fighting for that, and I agree we can all do better as individuals as well. And hopefully this webinar helps. It's going to take all hands on deck with what the latest UN climate reports have said, so I really appreciate that. And with that, let me just see if you do have any more questions again. Let's see. Make sure to type them into the chat box. Right here, palm oil was low on the greenhouse gas emissions list, but I've heard it's one of the main reasons rainforest is being deforested, and it is negatively affecting orangutans. Yes, palm oil, when it is not made sustainably, is a very large driver of deforestation. I haven't delved specifically into the numbers that much with that chart to look at how it's so low on the greenhouse gas emissions list, because they probably are pretty high on that when it comes to the deforestation scale. But yes, definitely look for sustainably harvested palm oil if you are buying products that have palm oil in them. I know there is a certification for that, so it's something to look for. And a lot of times palm oil, it's not something that we cook or use regularly. It's something that's in products that we use. So it's kind of hard to, look at every single label of everything that you're buying and see if there's palm oil in it or not, and whether or not it is sustainably harvested. But if you are, inclined to read labels like that, and, you see one cookie that doesn't have palm oil and one that does, it's a good decision to go with the one that doesn't have it. So something to think about there. I might have missed it, but could you state the web address for the webinars? Yes, it is the Green New York website. It is ogs.ny.gov/greenny. And that's where you can view all of our previous webinars, and this one will be up there as well, and you can also see what we have coming up in the future as well. So let's see, any laws related to food waste generated in New York State schools? A lot of schools are working on composting programs and other things. I'm not sure off the top of my head of any laws relating specifically with food waste at schools. But that is something to think about out there. And let's see here. Let's see if we have some more questions. And again, if you have any more questions, please type them into the chat box. I would like to thank everybody for jumping on the webinar today and for being engaged on sustainability topics, and especially as one as important as this. When it comes to our personal carbon footprint, you know, travel is right up there, so is the way that we heat our homes, but diet comes right in there near the top as well. So, as I said, there's no one-fits-all solution for this. I hope that you've come away with some knowledge that you can use in your own life to be able to make choices that will lower the carbon footprint of your food. And if you want to go make some poutine, I think that's a fantastic idea. I'm probably going to do that myself sometime soon. So let me just make one final check here for questions. And yes, one more thing that just came in here is there is a Good Samaritan law in New York for donating food for institutions, where it does cover them a little bit from liability. And so, you know, if you are working with a catering company or you have a large-scale event, make sure that you work with them on donation of any food that is still usable to a food bank or other place. And there's also a new app out there called Goodr, G-O-O-D-R, that's just gotten started that is looking to link up people with usable food, with food shelters and pantries and other places that can use it and get it into the hands of people in need. So food donation, if you are hosting any kind of events or anything like that, is always a fantastic way to reduce food waste and help on the social justice front as well. So with that, again, thank you everybody. Our next webinar is going to be on the second Tuesday of January at noon once again, and it will be on solar power. So thank you very much and have a great holiday season.